The parking lot attendant barely glanced up when the silver Mercedes pulled into the Hargrove Medical Center garage. That was normal. People came and went all day. But when the same attendant noticed who was stepping out of that car, a black woman in her late 60s, wearing a church dress and orthopedic shoes, moving slowly with a cane, something shifted in his expression. Not concern, not helpfulness, something else entirely. Her name was Miriam Tatum-Breckenridge, 71 years old, retired schoolteacher, church choir director for 38 years. The kind of woman who brought casseroles to funerals and remembered every student's birthday long after they'd grown up and moved away. She had driven 40 minutes to this hospital because her cardiologist, Dr. Singh, had an office on the 4th floor, and she had an appointment at 2:15. She had the referral paperwork in her purse. She had her insurance card. She had her copay in a small white envelope, already counted out. What she also had, though she couldn't have known it would matter, was a daughter. But that comes later. Miriam found a spot on level 2, turned off the engine, gathered her things with the careful deliberateness of someone whose knees didn't cooperate the way they used to, and made her way toward the elevator. The garage was dim and smelled of exhaust and concrete, and the fluorescent light near the elevator buzzed like something trapped. She pressed the button and waited. That was when Security Officer Dale Pruitt noticed her. Pruitt had worked at Hargrove Medical Center for 11 years. He was 43, broad-shouldered, with a jaw like a cinder block, and the kind of competence that came not from competence, but from never having been seriously challenged. He wore his uniform like it meant something beyond what it actually was. A security badge, a radio, a set of keys. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't even close. But in this garage, on this level, he carried himself like he owned the building and everyone in it. He watched Miriam press the elevator button. He watched her shift her cane. He watched her open her purse to check something, her phone, her appointment slip, it didn't matter. And something about that motion, that ordinary human motion of a woman checking her purse, made Pruitt's eyes narrow. He walked over. "Ma'am." His voice was flat. Not rude yet, but not warm either. "Can I help you with something?" Miriam looked up at him, the way people look at someone they didn't expect to approach them. "I'm fine, thank you. Just waiting on the elevator." "You have business here today?" She blinked. "I have a doctor's appointment." "Which doctor?" There was a pause. Not a guilty pause. The pause of a woman deciding whether to be annoyed. "Dr. Singh, cardiology, 4th floor, 2:15. She said each piece of information the way you'd speak to someone who needed things, said very clearly. Pruitt nodded slowly. "You mind showing me some ID?" "I'm sorry, ID. Some identification. This is a secure facility." Miriam Tatum-Breckenridge stood in that garage and looked at this man, this security guard in a garage, and she said very evenly, "I have never been asked for identification in a parking garage. Hospital policy." "Ma'am." "Then why wasn't anyone in front of me asked?" Pruitt didn't answer that. Instead he said, "Are you parked here? Let me see your ticket." She gave him the ticket. He looked at it, looked at her, looked at the Mercedes 2 rows behind her. "That your vehicle?" "Yes, that's a lot of car for a..." He stopped himself, but not before the sentence had already done what it was meant to do. "For a what?" Miriam said quietly. "Just seems like a nice vehicle." "It is," she said. "My daughter gave it to me." She got on the elevator. Pruitt watched it close. Then he went back to his station and called the front desk at hospital security and said something that would later be pulled from the call log and read aloud in a conference room by people who would not find it funny at all. What he said was, "Got a woman in the level 2 garage, older black female Mercedes, doesn't look like she belongs. Can someone meet her at the 4th floor and verify she's actually a patient?" Someone did. His name was Officer Vincent Lark, 31 years old. He'd been with hospital security for 2 years. He was not a bad man, not in the way Pruitt was, but he was the kind of person who followed instructions without asking why. And that, as it turned out, was its own category of problem. Lark met Miriam as the elevator opened on the 4th floor. He was standing there like he'd been waiting, which he had been, and Miriam saw him and felt something sink in her chest. Not fear. She was past the age of fear for this kind of thing, but a weariness so deep it had its own weight. "Ma'am," Lark said, "can I ask what you're doing on this floor?" "I have an appointment with Dr. Singh. Can I see your paperwork?" She showed him. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Do you have photo ID?" "Your colleague in the garage already asked me that." "I understand, ma'am. I'm just following up. Following up. She said the words the way you'd hold up an object to examine it. On what, exactly? Lark shifted on his feet. We received a report that someone on this floor might need assistance, and that someone is me. I just need to verify. Verify what? Her voice didn't raise. It didn't shake. It simply became very, very precise. I have an appointment slip with my name on it, and today's date. I have my insurance card. I have the referral from my primary care physician. I have been a patient of Dr. Singh for 4 years. I have driven 40 minutes to be here. What exactly is left to verify? The nurses at the cardiology reception desk had gone quiet. 2 of them were watching. A man in a waiting chair lowered his magazine. Lark said, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me while we sort this out. And that was when Miriam Tatum-Breckenridge did something that surprised even her. She sat down. Right there in the hallway, in one of the chairs along the wall, she sat down and she folded her hands in her lap, and she said, No, ma'am, I am not going anywhere. I have an appointment. If Dr. Singh wants to see me, he knows where to find me. And if you want to remove me from this hallway, you are going to have to physically remove a 71-year-old woman with a heart condition from the cardiology ward of a hospital. And I want you to think very carefully about whether that is how you want your afternoon to go. Lark stared at her. One of the nurses behind the desk made a sound that was almost a laugh but wasn't quite. He called Pruett on the radio. Pruett told him to hold her there and he'd come up. While they waited, a nurse named Kezia came around from behind the desk, poured a cup of water from the little cooler by the window, and set it on the chair beside Miriam without saying a word. Miriam looked at her. Kezia looked back. That small, quiet exchange between 2 women who understood each other perfectly without speaking. It mattered. It would come up later, when people tried to tell the story of what happened that afternoon. Kezia would become one of the people who told it most clearly. Pruett arrived. He came down the hallway, with his chest puffed out and his radio on his hip, and his eyes already doing the kind of work where you've decided what you think before you've looked at anything. He saw Miriam sitting in the chair, and he saw the paperwork she was holding, and he made a decision that would follow him for a very long time. Mrs. He checked his notepad, Tatum-Breckenridge. I'm going to need you to come downstairs with us. Why? We need to verify your identity. You have my appointment slip. You have my insurance card. I have my driver's license in my purse. It's not about documentation, ma'am. It's about what? The hallway was quiet enough that everyone heard the question, and everyone heard how long it took Pruett to answer it. Protocol, he finally said. Whose protocol? Show me the written policy that requires a patient with a confirmed appointment, verified insurance, and valid identification to be escorted from the floor she needs to be on. Pruett didn't have a written policy. There was no written policy. There was a phone call from a man in a garage who had looked at an elderly black woman waiting for an elevator and decided something was wrong, and that was the entire foundation of everything that was happening in this hallway right now. I'm going to have to call this in, Pruett said, which meant he was stalling. Call it in, Miriam said. Go ahead. He did. He stepped away from her and called the head of hospital security, a man named Frank Okafor, and yes, the irony of that name was not lost on anyone who read the incident report later. Okafor was in a meeting. Pruett left a message. Then he came back and stood in the hallway and looked at this 71-year-old woman with her cane and her folded hands and her appointment slip, and he said, You're going to have to wait. I am waiting, Miriam said. I was waiting before you arrived. It was 3:07 when the elevator at the end of the hall opened and the person who stepped out of it changed the entire temperature of that corridor. She was wearing army dress blues. Lieutenant Colonel Vivette O.C. Ashworth was 44 years old. She stood 5 feet 8 inches tall and had the posture of someone who had spent 22 years being inspected. Her uniform was immaculate, not in the way that means recently cleaned, but in the way that means it has never been anything else. On her chest were ribbons and decorations that meant things Pruett couldn't read and wouldn't have understood if he could. Her face, when she stepped off that elevator and saw her mother sitting in a hallway chair being talked down to by a man in a rent-a-cop uniform, went through a sequence of expressions that happened almost too fast to follow. Recognition, comprehension, fury, and then, most dangerous of all, control. She walked toward them the way people who have led soldiers in difficult places tend to walk. Not quickly, not aggressively, just inevitably. Mom. Miriam looked up, and something in her face finally softened. "Hi, baby. What's going on? These gentlemen," Miriam said, with a careful emphasis on the word, "have been verifying me." Vivette O.C. Ashworth turned to look at Dale Pruett. She looked at him the way you look at something you are assessing, not with anger, with something quieter than anger and considerably more effective. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Vivette O.C. Ashworth," she said. "This is my mother, Miriam Tatum-Breckenridge, who has a confirmed appointment on this floor with Dr. Singh at 2:15, which she is now late for. Can you tell me why she's sitting in a hallway?" Pruett opened his mouth. "We received a report from whom there was a concern flagged in the parking structure. By whom?" Pruett paused. "By me." The hallway was absolutely silent. "You flagged a concern," Vivette said, "about a 71-year-old woman with an appointment card, insurance, and a valid parking ticket, waiting for the elevator. The vehicle." "It was a..." Pruett stopped. He could feel himself walking toward the edge of something, and some part of him knew it, but he kept walking anyway. "A nice vehicle." Vivette O.C. Ashworth looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice that was perfectly, precisely even, "I'd like to speak to your supervisor. I'd like that to happen right now, before my mother misses any more of her appointment. And I want you to know that I have already sent a message to the hospital administrator's office, because I walked past their floor on the way up here, and I recognized their signage. And whoever needs to be in a room together about what happened today is going to be in that room very soon." Pruett said, "I think maybe this got a little out of hand." "It did," Vivette agreed. "Yes, let's talk about how." She walked her mother to the cardiology desk. Kezia, the nurse who had brought the water, personally escorted Miriam to the exam room and told her Dr. Singh had been notified about the delay and would be with her shortly. Then she came back out and said, to no one in particular and everyone simultaneously, "She's been incredibly patient." The meeting happened at 4:45 that afternoon in a conference room on the administrative floor. It included the hospital's chief operating officer, the head of security, 3 members of HR, a patient liaison officer, a representative from the hospital's legal team, and Lieutenant Colonel Vivette O.C. Ashworth, who sat across the table from all of them in her dress blues and did not raise her voice once. She didn't have to. She laid out the sequence of events in precise, documented order. She had the timestamp from her mother's parking ticket. She had the time on the appointment slip. She had the 47-minute gap between when her mother had been first stopped and when she had been allowed to reach her doctor. She had the text message Miriam had sent her from the hallway. "Vivette, they won't let me through. I don't want to make a fuss, but," which she read aloud in its entirety, including the way the sentence ended mid-thought, because her mother had run out of either words or courage or both, and that was the detail that made the hospital's legal representative stop writing on his notepad and look at the table instead. She explained calmly that her mother had a diagnosed heart condition, that she had been kept from her cardiologist for 47 minutes, that the reason for this detention appeared to be that someone had looked at her mother and her mother's car and decided something was wrong, and that the only evidence in the entire record for what had been wrong was a parking garage attendant's phone call in which he used the phrase, "doesn't look like she belongs." She placed a printed copy of the call log on the table. Then she said, "I want to be clear about what I'm asking for and what I'm not asking for. I'm not here to destroy anyone's life. I'm here because my mother sat in a hallway for 47 minutes with a heart condition because someone looked at her and saw a problem that wasn't there. I want to know what this hospital is going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. I want that in writing, and I want an apology, a real one, not a statement drafted by someone in this room's legal department, delivered to my mother by the individuals who stopped her, in person. Today, if possible. If not today, then this week." The chief operating officer said, "Lieutenant Colonel O.C. Ashworth, I want to assure you that this hospital takes..." "I know what you take seriously," she said. "I'd like to see it." Pruett was placed on administrative leave pending review before the meeting ended. The call log was pulled and preserved. The hospital issued an internal incident report. Nurse Kezia submitted a voluntary witness statement. 2 other nurses on the 4th floor did the same. The formal apology was delivered to Miriam Tatum-Breckenridge 2 days later, in the lobby of that same hospital, by the hospital's chief operating officer, and by Dale Pruett himself, who read from a statement and then, departing from it, looked at her directly and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I was wrong. Whether that apology was genuine or performed, or something complicated in between, Miriam received it with grace and did not comment afterward on which she thought it was. That was the kind of woman she was. Pruett did not return to work after his administrative leave. The circumstances of his departure were described in the official record as a separation by mutual agreement. Vincent Lark, the younger officer, was reassigned and required to complete additional training. He requested a meeting with Miriam through the patient liaison office. She agreed to it. What was said in that meeting stayed between them, which is probably how it should be. The hospital revised its security protocols. The new language explicitly stated that patients with valid appointment documentation could not be detained or redirected on the basis of a third-party report, absent specific, articulable behavioral evidence. The revision was named informally among the staff who drafted it after the date of the incident. Nobody called it the Miriam Protocol out loud, but a few people thought it. Lieutenant Colonel Vivette O.C. Ashworth returned to her post. She had driven to that hospital in civilian clothes, with her uniform, in a garment bag in the back seat, because she'd been at a Veterans Affairs luncheon that morning and hadn't had time to change. She changed in the hospital parking structure, in the car her mother had called a nice vehicle. She had been in uniform for 22 years. She knew what it did when people could see it. She had spent a long time trying to decide how she felt about that. About the fact that she needed the uniform at all. About what it meant that her mother hadn't been believed without it. She didn't have a clean answer. She didn't think there was one. What she knew was that her mother sat in a hallway chair and sent an unfinished text message because she didn't want to make a fuss. And Vivette O.C. Ashworth had decided, a long time ago, that making the fuss was her job. Miriam's heart, as it turned out, was doing reasonably well. Dr. Singh adjusted one of her medications and told her to walk 20 minutes a day and cut back on sodium and call the office if she noticed any new symptoms. She thanked him. She took the elevator back down to level 2, found her car where she'd left it, and drove 40 minutes home. She called her daughter from the driveway before she went inside. "I'm home," she said. "Good," Vivette said. "How's your heart?" Miriam was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tired, but okay." Her daughter said, "Yeah. There's something worth sitting with in this story. And it isn't the ending, though the ending, Matt. It's the middle. It's the 47 minutes. It's a woman with an appointment card and insurance and a valid parking ticket sitting in a hallway chair because someone in a garage decided she didn't look like she belonged. Think about how many times that happens in a day. Think about how many times there's no daughter in dress blues in the elevator. Think about what happens in those cases. The question isn't whether Miriam Tatum-Breckenridge deserved better. Of course she did. Every person who has ever been stopped and questioned and made to prove their right to exist in an ordinary space deserved better. The question is what happens when there's no one powerful enough to walk into the room and demand the answer. That's the question nobody in that conference room had to answer. And maybe that's the one that keeps this story from being just a satisfying ending and makes it something you carry with you instead. If this story stayed with you, if you thought about someone you know while you were reading, someone who has sat in a hallway chair or been asked to show their ticket while someone else was waved through, share it. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think should have happened differently at any point along the way, because these conversations matter, and the people who don't want them to happen are counting on silence. Don't give them silence.